2024 will be a big-time prove-it year for a lot of New Orleans Saints, but it's Derek Carr who will most be under the microscope. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to take a look at 6 different New Orleans Saints that must prove it in 2024. We'll take a look at Alontae Taylor and whether he'll be doing so on the inside or out wide. We'll take a look at a very important contract year coming up for Payton Turner. And we're going to lead everything off with a guy that a lot of folks feel need to prove it, even though he finished very strong at the end of the 2023 season. That, of course, is quarterback Derek Carr. What does he have to do to prove it to the New Orleans Saints fan base? We got all that coming up for you on today's episode. And we appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day and for being an everydayer here on the Locked On Saints podcast, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers are going to get $150 in bonus bets by winning any $5 bet for your first bet. Go and check them out today. It's $150 by winning any $5 bet as your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So I want to start off here with Derek Carr, because Derek Carr does have a lot to prove in 2024. And for some, he has more to prove than others. The fact of the matter here is that every quarterback enters their season in a prove-it year. There's just no exception to that. You either have to prove that you're still playing at the high level that you're playing. We saw that with Drew Brees over and over again. We've seen that with Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, all these guys over and over again. If you're one of the best in the league, you have to go in there and prove that you're still one of the best in the league every single year. If you're a guy that falls right into the middle of that category, you have to prove that you can be one of the higher end guys within that middle category, or potentially even make the leap to that next tier of status. And if you're somebody that's struggling in the NFL, you've got to prove that this team still wants to try to set things forth with you. Look at Mac Jones, you look at Justin Fields, you look at some of the other younger guys that have been moved on from very quickly over the course of their young NFL careers and all that. Kenny Pickett is another one. So I would look at all of those guys as the ones that are in the bottom rung. I would look at the guys like we were just talking about with Drew Brees and Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers. And I guess today's would be, Joe Burrow, Justin Fields, Patrick Mahomes, who doesn't really ever have to prove anything. Maybe he's the one that's kind of, I don't know. I guess truly you never really are immune to it if you really think about it. Because the moment that you slip up as one of those top tier guys, everybody's talking about you. So for Derek Carr, who I put a little bit more in kind of the middle tier of quarterbacks in the NFL, both by contract and by what we've seen in terms of playing talent, or not playing talent, but success on the field and things like that. Derek Carr is somebody that has to prove it. And there's 2 reasons why he has to prove it. First of which is because there's a large portion of New Orleans Saints fans, there's a large portion of people that doubt that Derek Carr will work with the New Orleans Saints, or that the New Orleans Saints will achieve with Derek Carr. So there's something to prove there. I don't necessarily put myself in that category because I don't think that the quarterback can make and can break your team, but I think that the rest of the team that's around them can make and break the quarterback as well. I think that this team all around is just as talented as I thought it was last year. And my biggest complaint last year was that they didn't do a good job utilizing the talent. Looks like they're working on fixing that this year. So for me, instead, the thing that I'm looking for Derek Carr to prove is what can he prove to the organization about how much longer he's in New Orleans. Like, the New Orleans Saints restructured his contract this offseason, but they're not in a situation to where they would be impeded from moving on this offseason if they decided, or next offseason if they decided that they wanted to. Now, it would be a post-June 1 transaction kind of a situation, but it would be an option for them. It would be something that they could still very much do. They take on a good bit of dead cap, all these other things, but the Saints have never been afraid to do that. And we're seeing more and more across the NFL that more NFL teams are willing to do that as well, if it means getting to somebody else that they really, really prefer in the position, particularly when it comes to quarterback. So nothing is out of the realm of possibility when it comes to the future or lack thereof for Derek Carr in New Orleans. So I think that the prove it nature of it is that really good close to the season that we saw last year. The prove it part of it is that he can pick up from that, even with this new system, even with another new offensive coordinator and another new offensive system, which typically has been a struggle for quarterbacks in the NFL their first year with with a new coordinator and things like that. If he can prove that he can come out and still play at that high level, like where he closed out the 2023 season, then I think that proves a lot and ends up turning that potential 2 or 4 year deal into a potential 3 or 4 year deal, or potentially more beyond that. Now, that becomes the big thing. Can he prove that he should be the long-term solution or longer-term solution in New Orleans, as opposed to just a guy that got them over the hump for a couple of years? And when I say over the hump, I just mean in terms of getting through your salary cap rebuild and all these other things that the Saints have clearly begun to kind of undertake. So I think that's the prove it part for me. It's not that I go out there and I say, hey, Derek Carr's bad or Derek Carr can't get it done or whatever. I don't look at players that way, but I do look at players and go, okay, this is an opportunity for you here to prove that you have a much larger role for this organization than many people expect. Can you go out there and prove it? And I have no expectations either way. I'm just excited to sit back and watch to see how it all goes. Another player that I think has something to prove this season is, of course, Trevor Penning. He has been the talk of the offseason, whether it be from the point, really all the way back to when he was effectively sat or benched during the 2023 season. What was going to be the future with him? Will he still be in the organ? Will he still be a part of the team going into 2024? Will they move him inside to guard? Will they draft another left tackle to potentially take over his starting spot? All these other things. So the Saints didn't necessarily draft a left tackle to take over for him, but they drafted a player that had left tackle, right tackle versatility. And because of that, they've been working him out at right tackle. And then the new offensive tackle, Taliesin Fuanga, the rookie out of Oregon State, drafted at 14th overall in the first round for New Orleans, is playing over at left tackle, which is where Trevor Penning had played going up to this particular point. So now he's getting moved over to right tackle. We'll see if that ends up being the long-term solution for him or just an information gathering situation for him. But in any case, he's got something to prove here, because he's got to prove that first round investment that this team made and the trades that they made with the Philadelphia Eagles to get that extra first round pick so that they could go get him, in addition to moving up to go and make sure that they got Chris Olave. You got to prove that all that was worth it, right? And that, I think, is one of the biggest things that is going to be really, really challenging for Trevor Penning going into 2024, is that not only does he have to prove that he's an adequate starter or that he can be a starter in the NFL on the offensive line, he has to prove that he can be a starter that's worth the value of what the team gave up to get him, which isn't his fault at all. Those are the decisions that the team and that the front office made. Those were not decisions that Trevor Penning made, but that's the standard that he's going to be held to. So we'll see if maybe that move over to right tackle, if it lasts, ends up being kind of this saving grace for him and allows him to prove, hey, yeah, I can be a starter in the NFL, and then give him the time at that position then in future years to prove, and I was worth every penny that they spent, or the majority of the pennies that they spent to get him to New Orleans in the first place. So those are the big things that I would be watching for in terms of two guys on the offensive side that really, really need to prove something in 2024. Not that they're worth NFL time or anything like that. Just have to prove the things that they themselves have to prove. Coming up next, we're going to take a look at a couple of guys going into contract years that are looking to prove that they deserve a second contract, starting with Payton Turner. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, where you can make every moment more with America's #1 sportsbook. It's win or go home time in the NHL and in the NBA, and FanDuel is giving you everything you need to make sure that your next shot is a big shot. You can do that right now by heading over to FanDuel.com/LockedOn, and right now, new customers are going to get $150 in bonus bets by winning any $5 bet as your first bet. For instance, tomorrow, the Dallas Mavericks favored by 2 points over the Minnesota Timberwolves to sweep that series. Could be something you put $5 down on, you win, and then bam, you get $150 in bonus bets that you can then spend on spreads, money lines, props. We were just talking about Derek Carr. Derek Carr right now has an over-under set in passing yards of 3,450 yards. You think he's going to exceed that? That's a place where you could put in some of that winning bonus bets that you get from your first $5 bet. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started, and you can check it all out over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, family. If there's anybody that really has something to prove this offseason, it is defensive end Payton Turner, the first round pick going into a contract year without his fifth-year option being picked up. If things don't take a turn in 2024, he might not be back in the black and gold for 2025. We appreciate you very much. As always, make it Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day. Don't forget to also go and check out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 stream. You can get rid of all the yelling and screaming from some of those other networks when you leave the TV on for too long. Instead, make the switch over to Locked On Sports Today, where you can get all of the in-depth analysis, news, and insight that you're looking for from the people that know the teams the best, the local experts on all of the biggest national stories. You can find that over on Locked On Sports Today's 24/7 stream over on YouTube and on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app as well. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So when I look at prove it players in 2024, I look at prove it players from about three different angles. The first angle that we looked at with Derek Carr and Trevor Penning are guys that just kind of inherently need to prove something. Derek Carr is a quarterback. He'll always be asked to prove something. Any player in that position will be asked to prove something. And then, of course, Trevor Penning, moving positions, new offensive scheme, all these other things. So it's all set for him to prove something. The two guys that I want to discuss next, both on the defensive side of the football, both in contract years, they're looking to prove it so that they can stay with this team. I think one of them is going to have an easier path than the other, but I'm going to start off with the tougher path, and that is for Payton Turner. So there's 3 or 4 different reasons why this is really tough for Payton Turner. First of all, the contract year, right? Adds a lot of pressure, adds a lot of, concern about if I do this, then this, if I don't, then this. And, you can kind of get a little bit in your head about all that, right? Adding up every little play, adding up every little moment, subtracting every misplay, subtracting every missed moment, and all those other things, trying to figure out if you can wrap up on a net positive so that you end up staying with the team. You feel me? And so that can be a little bit challenging just from the mentals side of it, of making sure that you're putting your best foot forward every chance that you get. So for Payton Turner, I do think that this is a big year for him, especially with the contract year. The second element is that his fifth-year option was not picked up. So that doesn't necessarily mean that he won't end up on the team. We see teams all the time, especially now with fifth-year options just getting more and more expensive every year. We see now fifth-year options getting declined pretty often, but then players still getting contract extensions and things like that. But, when we're talking about a contract extension for Payton Turner, I think that we're beyond the idea of a full-on second contract that's a 4 or 5 year deal. I think we're into the conversation of short-term extension, 1 year extension, 2 year extension kind of a situation. Just based on the fact that, look, he's been actually pretty impressive when he's out there on the field and he's had an impact and you've seen what he's been able to do. However, the biggest issue for him has been staying healthy and staying on the field. And that's, of course, a fair critique. And so that's the other thing that I think makes this a little bit more challenging too. Not only is it a contract year, not only did his fifth-year option not get picked up, but also he's been dealing with the injury. So it's not really him that has to prove something in terms of his talent. It's him who has to prove something in terms of, will his body hold up and will his body support what it is that he's trying to show? The other things that make it more challenging, Isaiah Foskey, Tano Passanio, Chase Young, Cameron Jordan, Carl Granderson. It's just Trajan Jeffcoat. Like, it's just a lot of numbers at the position. And somebody's got to be the odd person out. Somebody's got to be the odd person gone, or whatever that might be. And that could mean the odd person out in 2024. That could mean the odd person out in 2025. I don't know exactly which route they go. I was asked the other day to, pick, 4 edge rushers to be on the team for New Orleans. And outside of, Carl Granderson, Cam Jordan, Chase Young, and Tano Passanio, it's really hard to make a case for one of the other guys to be the fifth, right? Or to be in place of Tano Passanio. Now, Tano Passanio is the guy that I like because he can play outside and in, and I think that gives you some versatility. One of their best defensive line combinations that they had last year was when they had Granderson, Brian Brzee, and so last year's first round pick, Brian Brzee on defensive tackle, and then they had Tano Passanio on the inside, and then Zach Bond actually on the outside. that was one of their better and more productive, more attacking pass rush lineups that they had all last season. That lineup this year now looks like Carl Granderson, Brian Brzee, Tano Pasio, and then Chase Young, unless they want to bounce Cam Jordan to the inside for those particular snaps and try to get that NASCAR package of all three of those guys out on the field. But you see what I'm getting at here? There's a lot of talent actually at defensive end, at edge rusher for the New Orleans Saints. Now, they've got to be able to be more productive than they were last year, but is Payton Turner the difference in you being more or less productive at that position? Or is Isaiah Foskey the difference? Or is Tano Passanio the difference? Is it one of those guys? Is it a Trajan Jeffcoat that comes in and surprises everybody as a UDFA on the defensive line and ends up being the difference between talent and production versus talent and lack of production, which is what we saw last year? So I just think it's just a steep hill to climb for Payton Turner is all that it really is. It's not entirely even about him. It's not entirely even in his control, but this is why it's a prove it year for him. Because if he can go out there and prove it, despite all of those things, despite that steep climb, he's proven it in a really, really effective way. So that's what I'll say on Payton Turner there. I think that he has a lot to prove in order to be on the roster in 2025. But if he proves it, he'll have proved it with no questions asked, just completely based on the fact that there is so much stacked against them. So in the world that he proves it well. The other guy that I'll mention here that's also going into a contract year is Pete Werner. Second round linebacker coming out of Ohio State. Contract year for him. And then similar to Payton Turner, where there's a lot of talent at the position, at linebacker, not only is there talent at the position, but there's fewer spots to fill at the position as well. So Pete Werner now gets sort of the extra push with the fact that Willie Gay is now on that roster. And so now you've got Demario Davis, you've got Pete Werner, you've got Willie Gay, but is there a point at which Pete Werner gets surpassed by Willie Gay, and what does that mean for him? So not only does he have to prove his own value, which is really going to come through consistency. I think Pete Werner is another one of these guys that's kind of gotten like the short end of the stick in a lot of conversations. But I think the biggest thing is going to be consistently showing up the way that he shows up here and there, right? Kind of flashy. He's a pretty flashy guy, but also a very solid player, solid tackler, solid run defender, all these other things, the stuff that doesn't shine when it comes to the position. Willie Gay does the things that shine. He's a takeaway guy. He's a playmaker. He's got a ton of speed. I mean, it was hard not to see how ridiculously fast Willie Gay is when we were out there watching him during OTAs. It's hard to miss. It's hard not to watch. It's hard not to look at. And because of that, I think that that's going to stack up a little bit against Pete Werner, and it's going to force Pete Werner into a prove it situation, particularly in a contract year. I think his hill to climb isn't as steep, but I think with fewer opportunities at linebacker, because you're trying to fill that in with special teams, you're trying to fill that in with specialized guys that can be the weak side guys, the strong side guys, the middle guys, all that. There's just fewer spots to fight for, and there will be fewer snaps to fight for as well with the amount of two linebacker sets the Saints play. So Pete Werner will have a lot to prove to stay on the field in 2024 and to earn a contract beyond it as well. Coming up next, let's take a look at two more players that have a prove it year ahead of them. Guys that I kind of put in the same category and bucket as Pete Werner, to where they're trying to prove more to the fans than they're trying to prove to the organization. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at Game Time, my go-to ticketing app when I need tickets for any event, whether it be sports, comedy, music, like concerts, theater, comedy, whatever it is that I'm looking for. Game Time has you covered, and they do some of the greatest stuff out of when it comes to the ticketing industry. They have one of the most flexible customer service policies in the industry. They have the Game Time lowest price guarantee, where if you find a ticket in the same section, in the same row that you bought on Game Time somewhere else for cheaper, Game Time will actually refund you 110% of the price, or of the difference. And then on top of all that, there's zone deals, there's flash deals, and all-in pricing. And my favorite, you can see the view from the seat before you even buy the ticket. So when you're buying something for a high-profile game like Denver coming to town later on this year to take on the New Orleans Saints to return to Sean Payton, you want to make sure you got the best seats possible. Game Time is a place where you are not asking any questions. before and after you buy those tickets because they'll answer them for you. Go to the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Hope you're having a happy Memorial Day. We're here talking about 6 New Orleans Saints that have to prove it in 2024. Now, my next couple, I don't think have to prove as much to the organization as they have to prove to the fans. The big question is, for one of them, particularly Alontae Taylor, where is he going to get the opportunity to prove anything at all? We got that coming up for you here as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Appreciate you very much as always for being here with us. Don't forget, we are your team every day. So we're back with you tomorrow with 5 things that we're watching at OTA week 2, the second day open to New Orleans media. So we'll be breaking that down in tomorrow morning's episode with the second episode later that day, giving you all the biggest news and notes from that very OTA practice. And of course, we're going to be taking a look at that QB2 battle, it feels like, between Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener, which really starts with Jake Haener well ahead. But what can Spencer Rattler do to close everything up? We're going to look at that in tomorrow's episode. All right, so cornerback Alontae Taylor is a guy that I feel like has caught kind of like more and more flack over the course of the offseason. Like, as we've gotten further and further away from the very strong way that he finished the 2023 season, there have been more questions than answers about him throughout the offseason. And I think he's gotten a little bit of an unfair shake. He's been asked to play a position, out of position. Remember when they got rid of Bradley Roby, that was the first thing that I said was like, this is not a good place to put Alontae Taylor. Not because Alontae Taylor can't eventually learn that place, but that's just not his bread and butter. That's not where he performed. I think he had like 40 something snaps in his college career in the slot. And then all of a sudden they moved him into the slot. I mentioned the other day that he feels like a guy that could potentially end up being like another Zach Bond, where he has a ton of talent, but he's just never given the opportunity to play where that talent shows the most. Last year, you saw him come out at the end, at one point in 2023 at the end of the season against Tampa and then against Atlanta, where he had to play on the outside, and he played extremely well, but then also was benched against the Los Angeles Rams playing in the slot. And then there was another game where he was pulled for a couple of snaps as well. I believe it was against Atlanta before he went back out on the outside due to an injury. And then when he was on the outside, he played extremely well. During his rookie season, when he played outside, he played extremely well. And I get the idea that you want to have all of those guys on the field, but that doesn't necessarily mean the same thing, right? And I think that this is where a little bit of like short-sightedness can happen sometimes when you're looking at like team building approaches and everything. Why just have Marshawn Lattimore and Paulson Adebo on the field when you can have Marshawn Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, and Alontae Taylor on the field? That sounds really good, right? But when you're asking one of them to play a position that they've never played before, you're not getting that version of that player that you're romanticizing, that's being thought of, right? Oh yeah, we'll get all 3 of them on the field at the same time. Nothing can go wrong with that, except for when you have one of them do something that severely diminishes their opportunity to be able to go out there and play. Now, I will say this. Alontae Taylor struggling in the slot is not all on Alontae Taylor. That's equally on the New Orleans Saints coaching staff for having made that decision. That was something that they had to be okay with, right? Yep, look, get it. Asking him to do something that he hasn't done before. There has to be some type of level of patience with that, right? And then when they took Alontae Taylor out and put somebody else in the slot, that didn't go great either. So the Saints just kind of struggled at that position when Alontae Taylor was struggling, period. And there were games where he wasn't. In fact, he was actually named by one of Touchdown Wire's guys as one of the best press corners in the NFL because he barely allowed anything to happen when he was in press coverage. And so a lot of that comes from when he's playing on the outside, but there are those opportunities in the slot as well. So whether he's playing in the slot or out wide, I think the biggest thing for Alontae Taylor is that he has to prove to the organization that they're making the right choice by putting him in the slot. But I think for the most part, the people that are really asking the questions are the people that are viewing, the people that are watching the game. And so I think that that's really who he's looking, if he wants to prove anything to anybody, that's who he's looking to prove. Now, I've talked to Alontae enough to know that he doesn't feel like he has to prove anything to anyone. He just wants to go out there and do his job. And that's the right attitude, right? You got to be able to manage adversity. You got to have the short-term memory. You got to have all that stuff, right? You got to be able to give up a big 50-yard pass on one play and then come back with a 50-yard pick six on the next play. Like, you got to be able to do that kind of stuff. And Alontae Taylor, when he picked off his first pass against Baker Mayfield, it reminded me of a young Derek Stingley back in LSU when he finally got like his first interception of the season. And it was late in the season. I think it was a game against maybe Vandy or something like that. And then after that, it was kind of like the floodgates opened and he just got interception after interception after interception after interception. Now, Alontae had a really nice game against Atlanta as well. Can he continue to build on some end of season momentum going into 2024? But the big question is going to be, will he be playing in the slot? If Marshawn Lattimore and Paul Sandivo are there, he's not playing out wide, but does Kool-Aid McKinstry challenge for a spot in the slot? Does Will Harris challenge for a spot in the slot? That's going to be the other interesting part to watch throughout all this. So just as much as he's got to prove something in terms of his ability to play and what it is that he's doing during the course of 17 games, he might have a little bit of proving to do in order to hold on to that role going into week one as well. So I guess that is a situation where he's got to prove something to the organization. One guy that doesn't have to prove anything to the organization, but that I'm so excited to watch in 2024 is Cameron Jordan. Cameron Jordan ain't got to prove nothing to me. Ain't got to prove nothing to me. But every week I feel like I get the question, should Cam Jordan move inside? Should Cam Jordan move to defensive tackle? Things like that. Those are things that generally people ask when they don't believe that a player can play on the outside anymore. And in particular, when they believe that he can't rush the passer anymore, because that seems to be the number one thing that any person is looking at when watching the game of football from those edge rushers. They're not looking at, taking away play action flats. They're not looking at taking away the run game. They're not looking at, containing and all these other things. They're looking at pass rush, which it's not a bad thing. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but that's really the way that people will typically evaluate edge rushers. And so in a season where we're talking about a guy like Payton Turner, who's got a lot to prove, Cam Jordan doesn't have a lot to prove, but I think there are a lot of people that are asking questions about what he's going to look like in 2024. Now, he's talked about having his redemption arc. If I were him, I would call it the villain arc. He's going to be at that point. He's going to be, he's 34 now, birthday's in July, so he'll be 35 by the time that he gets to the regular season. Be a villain, Cam. Just be a villain, man. Like, this is the villain arc time. Like, go for it. I'm all in for villain arc Cam Jordan. I'm all in for redemption arc Cam Jordan too. But I do think that the faith that the organization has comes from the fact that they understand the injuries that he was playing with and stuff like that. They understand the way that they changed his role because of those injuries, having him be more of a run stopper than having him go after the passer. So I'm excited to see a healthy Cam Jordan, or healthier Cam Jordan, get back out on the field, regardless of his age, for 60-something% of snaps probably this year, and having an impact and being somebody that can be a leader for this team, and not just a set by example type of leader, which isn't a type of leadership that I typically truly believe in, but be the vocal guy that can go out there and get everybody ready for the season. So I think Cam Jordan's got some proving to do to folks that doubt him. I am not in that class of people. I don't think that the New Orleans Saints organization is in that class of people either. So he has the easier hill to climb there, but I do think that coming out in the first couple of weeks and getting after the quarterback a couple times and kind of showing like, hey, I'm back, I think will be a big deal for Cam Jordan. It would also prove a lot too, in terms of what you're able to do at the age of 35 as an edge rusher. That could go a long way as well. All right. Coming up tomorrow, we're taking a look at 5 things that we're looking for in watching in OTA week 2, the second media practice, or second practice open to media, including that quarterback 2 battle between Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler. We're also going to take a look at kickers, because I do believe we'll see the next pair of kickers and punters, the challengers, Matthew Hayball as well as Charlie Smith, in tomorrow's OTA. So we're going to break all that down in tomorrow's episode. We appreciate you very much making us your first listen of the day every day. Hope you had a happy Memorial Day. I took a little bit of time to myself today, kind of doing the show a little bit late. That's how I'm spending Memorial Day, though, was just getting a little bit of relaxing in earlier on. So hope that you have a wonderful Memorial Day, had a wonderful Memorial Day weekend, kept it safe, and look forward to seeing you here again soon. Appreciate you as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. and trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.